Yeah, my name's James. Been coming to this church for a long time. If you don't know me, welcome. Say hello afterwards. I'm going to be finishing the series in Elijah this morning, and I am disappointed because it's a real privilege to do it this morning. I'm really excited, but I've really enjoyed this series. It's really been. I feel the word significant. Personally, there's things in this series that I've been in every one, and they have so challenged me and encouraged me, and they've been significant, I think, on my personal journey. So what I'm going to do, I stole something from my daughter who's doing her A-levels. I want you to take a card, okay? And whether it's this morning or whether it's something that's come up in the series before, I just want you to take the moment, please, and just take a moment to write down on this card something that impacted you about the story of Elijah and Elisha we're going to do this morning. And you could start by, it doesn't have to be something I say today. I'm going to do a tiny, quick recap, and then I'm going to blast through the story of the handover from Elijah to Elisha. If I get it wrong, really sorry. It's confusing. So please, can we have some volunteers? So split them up. They're really lovely colours. Sorry to my daughter if she's watching online. I don't think she is, because she doesn't know I stole them. It's going to ruin her A-level revision probably. But and you need pens. And if you're lucky, there's a new pens in there. There's a new style. You get the old ones first. Please give the pens back. You can keep the card. The card is for you. Favourite colour, whatever you want. The pens are to be given back at the end. We'll put the box at the back or something, or drop them in the PA booth. And please just write down something that impacted you about this story. And just doesn't matter what it is, but something that challenged you. From today or from this last week. We've been in this passage nearly a quarter of a year because we started the middle of January. And one way to read people's stories, I came across this recently, 3 things to look for: facts, feelings, and values. We read in James. James does this. He reads in James 5:16, and this is the framework for what we're doing. Elijah was a human being just as we are. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. He prayed again, the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its crops. So fact is that Elijah was a man, just a man, just like us, just a human. And yet, he prayed. Another fact, he prayed. And if you have feelings, it says in the King James, he was subject to like passions. I mean, we see the depression he has later on in the series, and earlier on we see the kind of exuberance up on the mountain. And so he has these feelings, and the intensity of his prayer, you get there. And also these values, righteous, right before his Maker. Effective, fervent, righteous prayers. So just blasting through a recap, so you can think about that as a constructor to make some notes, or if you want, just write down something that spoke to you about the story of Elisha and Elijah. Sorry, Elijah. I'm going to really trip over that. So the recap, we're going to go fast. Maybe there's something that I say that's more the personal, my take on it, and maybe you're like, no, I got that out of the story, so write it down and stick that somewhere that you keep and remember it. It's important to remember sometimes and to remember what's being said. But we started out in January with this simple trust in God's provision by the brook Kerith, with the ravens feeding Elijah. He had given this one-sentence prophecy of no rain, and then he legged it and hid in the mountains. God told him to. And he receives God's provision, and then God stretches it. The ravens stop coming, the brook runs dry, and he goes to this widow and receives the provision through her. And then God says, I'm not just the sustainer, I'm now the giver of life, as he resurrects her son. That's 1 Kings 17. And then God calls him out into the culture, out into the wilderness, actually, the area. And he has to be empowered by prayer as he meets this Ahab and Jezebel, the king. And you get this sense that God is now on the move. Something's going to happen. Something's happening. God's on the move. And he meets this man, Obadiah. I love that story. They're radically different people. Just completely opposite ends. This crazy guy in the desert and this sophisticated, middle, upper class, affluent man who's serving in the king. Yet they have this same purpose. the same unity of purpose, the same God, and they're uniquely positioned together to courageously impact and bring salvation. And we see the contest that happens on the top of Baal, the fire that comes, burns up the idolatry, transforming worship, impacting lives. And he prays in perseverance on his knees. And the rain comes. I hear the sound of the rushing of rain, not a cloud in the sky. And the rain comes. And the work has begun. God is on the move and he's doing something. And then he legs it, he runs. This is crazy, literally like an ultra marathon. 100 miles. Fear and isolation that drive him into a corner. He's so fearful, he's so isolated. And God comes again. There's the emotions, the pits, the depths. And he needs these physical things, the food, the sleep, the water. He's revived physically. God in his mercy just revives him. And then there's this wind, earthquake, fire. But no, it's the small voice. And God recommissions him and gives him a task. And he tells him to go, anoint this guy, anoint someone else, and then Elisha. Okay, it's happening already. So note the order. Anoint Jehu, king of Israel, Hazael, king of Syria, and then Elisha as a prophet. And this really re-envisions Elijah. I'm going to trip over it so much. I'm going to try hard. So off he goes again. It's like we need purpose, don't we? And he's got his purpose again. And there's this series then of second chances for Ahab. And you see Simon talked us through this period, where there's a series of prophets, not Elijah, but a series of prophets who give these prophecies. Eventually there's Naboth's vineyard, and eventually, though, Elijah gives the final prophecy, and Ahab actually dies, and others take on, and it carries on. But just before that, he did pass on the baton to Elisha, this man who has this intensity of commitment. He burns his wealth, his security, just is all gone, this 12 yoke of oxen. And he's not for the prophet school, we'll come to this, but he's to partner and to learn on the job. So this is the context now where we see the handing over. And there's 3 parts to the story this morning we're going to go through. And it's Elisha we're following. There's this determination and diligence in Elisha. Determination and diligence to do his job. To do the work he has to do. But as he does it, we'll see that he has to move from a position of diligence to dependence. He has to depend because he can't do it on his own. And as that dependence comes, we see that God is on the move, and he moves from this place of like this judgment. There's a lot of judgment in Elisha's ministry. Oh, this is hard. He moves from this position of judgment, and he brings this ministry of deliverance through Elisha. Great deliverance. So that's the structure. Determination and diligence have to move to dependence. And through that dependence, you see this great deliverance. So I'm going to read the first bit of passage, 3 bits of passage today. And we'll get on with the passage we're looking at. When the Lord was about to take Elijah, so this is 2 Kings 2. So the split between 1 Kings, 2 Kings is just arbitrary. The translators did it. It's just a continuation. So 2 Kings 2, 1-6. When the Lord was about to take Elijah up into heaven in a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here. The Lord sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I'm not going to leave you." So they went to Bethel. The company of prophets of Bethel came out to Elisha, and they said, "Don't you know the Lord's going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," Elisha replied. "So be quiet." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. The company of prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha, and they asked him, "Don't you know that the Lord's going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know," he said. "So be quiet." Then Elisha said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I won't leave you." So the two of them walked on. 50 men from the company of prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak and rolled it up, and he struck the water. The water divided to the right, to the left, and the two of them crossed on dry ground. So I don't know if you've been camping. I've camped a lot. One of the last trips we did, we haven't camped so much recently, I wonder why, but we love camping. But we were in Cornwall in August, the end of the season. And the thing about camping at that time of year, especially on the south coast and on the southwest of England, is the storms come in. And you get these summer storms, the end of the summer, and they can be quite violent. And when you're in Cornwall, there's not a lot of shelter. So what do? And this really big storm was going to happen, and we were there with the kids. And so what I did was I packed. We were there for a couple of nights, but I'm like, I'm going to pack. And I packed the whole car, and I put everything right. And then I went round the tent, and I went round, and every peg, I checked the peg. I put it in, make sure it's really solid. I checked the guy rate, a bit of slack, not too much. And then I'm going all the way around, and then right at the front of the tent, where the prevailing wind was, I parked the car there. Actually, this really kind guy next door had this van in his caravan. He was going the next day, parked his van to shelter our tent. And this is a little bit like what's going on this morning, okay? Elijah knows he's going to go. I mean, this is like the worst kept secret. Everyone's on the gossip. Everywhere they go, the prophets, the company of prophets, are gossiping. It's like, don't you know? Do you actually realize what's going on? It's like, yeah, I know. Everyone knows. So, of course, Elijah knows the open secret. But Elijah is diligent in preparing for his passing. And it's a bit of a circuitous route he's going to take. But I'll show it in a minute on the map, but he's going around checking these schools of prophets, okay? And it seems, this is my conjecture a little bit, but there's these prophetic voices. God had saved 7,000. We know that. It says it earlier on in the book. But he'd saved 7,000. That's 1 Kings 19. He told Elijah that when he was in the wilderness. And now we see these collective sort of positions of prophets in the community. And Elijah is visiting them. And Elijah's on this longer journey. But these are quite significant places. They're places of idolatry and sin from the past. There's this place where Bethel, Jeroboam had set the golden calf up there and instituted this non-Levitical priest, this crazy feast. And then there's Jericho, the place where they had been cursed after the battle. And Joshua said, it's never going to bear fruit. Nothing's going to be built there. That's Joshua chapter 2, 3, and up to 5. And so here you find these sons of prophets. Maybe they're like trainees, acolytes. They're pupils of this community in these strategic locations. And a little bit of the segue back into 1 Kings 20 as Simon was last week. You see they're quite active actually at this time. After Elijah gets back, you see a prophet in 1 Kings 20 gives a prophecy, then a man of God in 1 Kings 20, 28, and then later on 1 Kings 20, 35, one of the company of prophets. So there's a series of prophecies that occur after Elijah returns. So I think he's kind of connected in with them a lot more. And then eventually you see Elijah from the Tishbite, and that's in 1 Kings 21:17. So there's this succession of activity that's going on in the prophetic word. So maybe, okay, my conjecture, maybe Elisha's a little bit from loner to leader, with Elisha as his right-hand man, and there's these schools of prophets that are active. And Elisha is also on this really significant journey. I've got a map. I don't know if it's going to come up on the screen, but Elijah is doing, let's call it like the reverse walk into the promised land. It's a very significant journey because if you remember back, if you know your Old Testament, the children of Israel had come up through the desert. You can see the long loopy bit through the kind of the bottom left middle bit of the screen. That's the wilderness years through the desert. It's actually where Elijah had run to when he was kind of hiding from everything, and then he had to run back again or walk back. But then they went up the side all the way through the sea, the Dead Sea there, and then they get to the top, and then they go in to the promised land, and they cross the Jordan. And this is the reverse journey he's doing. As they entered the promised land, there's a series of events, including a really big battle that happens at Jericho, which is the curse bit. And they are reverse walking the entry to the promised land. So Elijah is definitely, why he's going that way, there seems to be some compelling reason he's going there. And if you remember why, you also will remember that there is this place there that Moses never entered the promised land, but he stood and he saw it. And Elijah is heading to that place. So these are very significant places along the way. These are significant moments. A reverse walk into or out of the promised land. So what do we learn from this bit of the passage? I think we learn a couple of things. We have to admire Elijah's phenomenal preparedness for his tasks. It's like he's battened everything down. He's checking it all. He's obviously been really active at work with Elisha. He's also really connected in with these schools of prophets. And you can admire Elisha's great perseverance and humility in his service here. He's determined to follow. He wants to be there at every moment that is everything that's going on. As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, the moment you're alive, till the very last moment, I will not leave you. So Elisha's ministry had been hard and lonely, and Elisha is exercising the power of choice, the choice to persevere, the choice to carry on that journey. And notice these little bit passive prophets and this dynamic, busy Elisha, determined to pursue the path that Elisha is going. The prophets are there. They're kind of doing that, a little bit passive. And Elisha's so humble. Yes, I know, be quiet. There's a sense of the gravity of this moment. It's not gossip, it's grief for Elisha. The loneliness and loss is ahead when the teacher is gone. And the understanding of this chapter is in its context, okay? I've got this guy I know at work, a friend through work. He's Jewish. He served in the military in Israel, moved afterwards to the UK, lives in Cambridge. And he's not a practicing Jew, but he definitely has this really profound respect for it. He was emphatic to me that this is a true story. And he says it's an amazing journey. He's done it. He's traveled across. And it starts in the high Midlands in Israel, travels across Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho. It's not a direct route they went. It's deliberately circuitous. And it goes down into the valley and then back out to the mountains where Moses departed and where Moses died. So this reverse chronology is like a reverse history, parting the waters. And God is rooting Elijah's life in the context of Israel's history. Because it's very easy to think, well, why did he not finish the job? Why did he not anoint these two kings? Why did he not do Jehu, king of Israel, Hazael, king of Syria? Two more kings happen next after Ahaz. And why just Elisha? And I don't have all the answers, but God's pleasure with Elijah was not in the completion of the work. It was not in the completion. His pleasure was in the doing of the job. He saw Elijah's work and he decided to take him, not because of what he had achieved, but because of what he had done, the way he had done it. And it's because from a theological perspective, the work is God's. It's bigger than Elijah. It's bigger than Elisha. I'm tripping over this Elijah thing. But it's bigger than both of them, and it's bigger than you and me. But in a sense of diligence and humility, it's a part of a grand narrative of redemption. It's rooted in the past, the things God has done. It's rooted in what he's doing now. See it. He is at work. But it's rooted in the narrative of final redemption, the promises of the future. So we have to take this passage in the great theological perspective. I'm going to come back at the end as well, just to look at it from the perspective of types, of how it signals what Christ was going to do. But for that, I want to talk about dependence with Elisha. So I'm going to read the next bit of the passage. So this is 2 Kings 2, 6 to 14. When they had crossed the Jordan, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" Profound sense of his destiny here. And Elisha replied, "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit." "You've asked a difficult thing," Elijah said. "Yet, but if you see me when I'm taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not." Is there a test there of his dependence? Is he casting it to God's hand? As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elisha went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and he cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And Elisha saw him no more. And he took his garment and he tore it in two. Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him. He went back. He stood at the bank of the Jordan. He took the cloak that had fallen from Elijah and he struck the water with it. "Where now is the God, the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he asked, when he struck the water, and it divided to the right, to the left, and he crossed over. So Elijah knew his journey was not an earthly journey, and no earthly power would stop it. And so the waters moved. He smote the river, and it let him go. And so Elisha is now asking him, "I want that." And it's not a greedy double portion ask. This is entirely scriptural, Deuteronomy 21:17. This is what you ask for if you're an heir. So the firstborn would always have a double portion from any other child because they were to carry on the ministry of the family. And so Elisha is not desiring power, but he's desiring enabling for the work ahead. He wants it. He has a profound sense of his destiny to carry on the work of Elijah. And so he is asking for the equipping, a sense of the amount of work, the immense task ahead of him. And so he's like, I need the help, all the help I can get. So he's saying essentially, I'll count the cost. I'll do it. I'm the firstborn. I will carry it on. But I need it to be an appointing, an anointing. There's a clinging on. And there's a compassion from Elijah. Maybe Elijah knew his pain, the sense of the high demand and the high cost. So it's a request from a desire, from a sense of need, an awareness of his lack, and his need to have something else to sustain him on this journey. He needs to move from diligence to dependence on that power. He's exercising it. And it's kind of like this banal conversation. They're like chit-chat along the way, day-to-day living. And God comes, bang, this chariot of fire, horses of fire come in. And this whirlwind takes Elijah away. And it has these warlike connotations, chariots of war things, okay? That's the only real context for them. horses and chariots, they're war, it's battle. And he cries, my father, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel, because he sees Elijah as the spiritual power behind the nation. The power of prayer was the thing that won the battles, mightier than the army of Israel. Spiritual recognition. If you look back even in English history, I was talking to Neil and Zulma the other week about this actually. They'd stopped at Biggin Hill at the chapel there next to the aerodrome. And there's a chapel there dedicated to the men and women who prayed for the Battle of Britain in the air, in the skies, when Nazis were invading Europe. And there is a story of the power of prayer to break through at a pivotal moment in the battle where we lost the battle in the skies, and then suddenly the plane stopped. And we essentially, you could say, perhaps from a spiritual perspective, there were turning points. And it is interesting here to see how he sees his mentor, the chariots and horsemen of Israel, that prayer is the answer, it is the battle thing that wins. So he takes the garment and he tears it and he picks up the cloak that's fallen from it. And at a time when a nation is deeply entrenched in idolatry and sin, and there's such a need for something, it's amazing that there's this sense that there's not a moment lost. It's like the mantle falls, it's picked up. And God shows this great continuity in what he's doing. You can understand that there's a discontinuity in change. It's like, everything's changing, it's going to happen again, it's like everything's up in the air. And no, it's like there's not a moment where God doesn't leave his people without a prophet. God's stuff just happens. It's like a freight train. It's going to happen, it will happen, it's just going forward until that day of redemption, consistently driving forward. Nothing can stand against, nothing can stop. And it's up to Elisha to pick it up and carry it on. So the moment's not lost. And God made sure that his man was there and the moment was there. In fact, to show how important that picture is to say, what did people say of Elisha? And in 2 Kings 13:14, King Joash is grieving Elisha on his deathbed. He's dying. And he says, my father, the chariots and the horsemen of Israel. He uses that same refrain of Elisha. It's a call of grief, but also comfort here for Elisha. And the mantle and cloak is left on the ground as a token, a significant sign. Baal was the storm god. So it's kind of like irony that God is in the storm. And he takes his man in the storm of the whirlwind. And as Elisha strikes the water, it's a bit like this, okay? If you're going to pray, how do you pray? Because, I don't know, maybe it's a bit like this. It's like, if I had the cloak, if you had the cloak, sorry, my wife had a headache. So if you are going to pray, if you were standing by that water and you had the magic cloak, okay, it's like, you're going to dip it in. It's like, what's this going to do? It's like, you just touch the water. Just touch it. Is it going to move? Is there a little bit of movement here? And he's not going to do that. He's like a strike. He struck the water. And he shouts. It's like, where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? Is there, I don't know if there's a little bit of doubt, a bit of worry in it. And there might be. Is there a bit of like a cry of like, is he there? But it's also such a confident gesture. He strikes it. He doesn't like dip it in. He doesn't dip his toe in. And the water's open. It creates this entire journey ahead. His perspective and ability to seize that promise and actually just go for it opens this whole new opportunity ahead. He strikes it. The water's open and he goes ahead. He's not alone. God is on the move. It's a signal of continuity of his power, working through the individual unchanged, all of that unfinished tasks that were not done, the people not appointed, the stuff that's happened. It's like God saying, it doesn't matter who's in the picture, I'm getting it done. The question is whether that's you. He depends on God's power for the ministry and he aligns with God's will. He's determined, yet he's steadfastly humble, earnest request for help. So we see the fruit of his diligence and dependence is set in motion. God is on the move now. Again, doesn't matter who it was, he's still on the move. It springs forth. And what we see about Elisha's ministry is actually a tremendous doubling of the fruit. If there was a sense of judgment before, there's a sense of something else that's new that springs forth for Elisha. Ooh. So I'm going to read it. This is 2 Kings 2:19 to 22. So we're back in Jericho. He's on the move. He's with this new journey, doubling back into the promised land, digging deep, walking back into the thick of the situation he has to go back to. Nothing's changed. It's all the same, but he's going to go back and he's going to bring amazing new things. 2 Kings 2:19 to 22. The people of the city said to Elisha, "Look, our Lord, this town is well situated, as you can see, but the water's bad, the land's unproductive. Bring me a new bowl," he said, "and put salt in it." Salt is Levitical, it's with the sacrifices. It's significant there. So they brought it to him, verse 21. And he went out to the spring and he threw salt in it, saying, "This is what the Lord said. I've healed this water. Never again will it cause death or make the land unproductive. And the water has remained pure to this day, according to the word Elisha had spoken." In the Old Testament, there's a sense of something called types and something called foreshadowing, theological words, okay? So types are people that show you something. They're like, wow, this is all, they're quite like Christ, but they're not quite. And there's this pattern of them coming through the Old Testament, prophet, priest, king. Elijah and Elisha, this is types, okay? Elijah. There's also a sense of something called foreshadowing, events that point to something greater. And the writers all the way through the Old Testament into the New, they use that construct. You have to look for it. So we have like the fire of judgment that burns the sacrifice. It actually, in 2 Kings 1, it burns these soldiers who are sort of deliberately against Elijah and his prophecy. There's this chariot of fire and horses that is fearful, but also causes the rescue. The rescue from that is as Elijah goes to heaven. But then there's the water. And if Elijah's first act is to call drought, Elisha's first act is to cause this abundant pure water. Never again will it cause death or make the land unproductive. So as I said, this journey is rooted in the land. It's going back to the past. Elijah and Elisha have gone out of the land and they're looking back. In fact, if you stand at the place where they think Moses left, you can see right across Israel. So Elijah points back to Moses. Both are called to Israel, calling them back to covenant faithfulness. Elijah and Moses both deal with this culture of rebellion and disobedience. Both of them died outside the promised land. Both of them left behind disciples to take up the unfinished work. Both of them appear with Jesus in Matthew 17. So it's a hugely symbolic pointer. But it's also about the future. And as we turn the page on the Old Testament, the very last chapter, chapter 4 in Malachi, you should know that the last recorded prophecy speaks about Elijah will return. It's in John the Baptist. Elijah points forward to John the Baptist. John the Baptist is a prophet who wears these same clothes, these hairy clothes. He cries out from the wilderness against this national power. He's opposed by this king and then this woman Herodias, okay? So you've got, remember, Jezebel behind the throne, and you've got Herodes who's behind the throne seeking John the Baptist's life. And John the Baptist anoints his successor at the Jordan. just the same as Elisha and Elisha, this crossing of the Jordan. John the Baptist sees his successor, the firstborn, receive the inheritance as we see Christ. Jesus fulfills it. So Elijah points us back to the things that have happened and forward to Christ. So there's this continuity of divine purpose. The present. Joshua means Yahweh is my salvation. Elisha means God is my salvation. There is a moment here that is about life-giving water. See, I do a new thing. Isaiah 43:19. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? A way in the wilderness, a stream in the desert. John 7:38, as Christ speaks, from you flow streams of living water. So God has changed us, but he pushes ceaseless change on the world. But his ministry transcends that change. I love the coaching Timothy in Timothy. Paul's writing to Timothy. It says that they will turn their ears from the truth. This is 1 Timothy 4:4-6. But you, keep your head in all situations, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, discharge all the duties of your ministry. For I am already poured out like a drink offering, and the time of my departure is near. A profound sense of Paul handing over his work as he finished up, poured out like this water. But he's discharging all the duties of his ministry. He's doing everything he can. He's not finished. He didn't finish the places he wanted to go to. So I want to bring a reflection and a challenge. It's not about what you've achieved, because the work is God's to get done. It's about how you go about it. Do we serve with diligence? Do we serve with great dependence? Because you will never know the impact of your work. You will never know what you've really done. But you do know someone who does. And that's your performance check-in. So here's my reflection and challenge on this series. I hope you've written down something, or go home and write it down. Find a quiet moment to do your performance appraisal. I love Elisha, the ultra runner. He's an ultra runner. He ran 100 kilometers or more. But he's also like some crazy stretching person. I love this image of him praying. We heard Maria's testimony this morning. In Kings, 1 Kings earlier, when he's on the mountain praying for rain, he has his head between his knees. How do you do that? It's like, that's hard. He has his head in his knees, and it's not a cloud in the sky. It's persistence and diligence. He doesn't give up. And I love that image of Elisha. He doesn't like dip it in the water. He just strikes the water with this cry of like kind of confidence, but also like hope, worry. Is it going to happen? And he's just like slam dunk. He just does it. Remember those prophets, all these prophets. They're kind of always there in the story. And this is my challenge. Are you a passive prophet? Are you a passive prophet? Are you watching the great works, happy to speak of the miracles? Are you a passive prophet? You know, it's crazy, right? They prophesied. They actually prophesied that he was going to go today. And then when Elisha gets back, they're like, oh, where's he gone? Where's he gone? We're going to go and look for him because we don't believe you. It's like, what are they doing? Are they a passive prophets? Do they believe what they say? Or are you a diligent, dependent disciple? I love the diligence and dependence of Elisha. Perhaps we just need to let the myopic kind of disappointment and frustration, perhaps, of these wilderness experiences, perhaps we just need to let them go. All the questions around the unfinished things. But to step up from the story is to see the great narrative of what God was doing. The wilderness fueled this new purpose in his life, this powerful purpose, a call of diligence to work and worship. He handed it on, unfinished, but the job was well done. Just an aside, Simon unpacked something last week. I can't resist unpacking it a little bit more. 2 evil women, the Jezebel and Herodias. Okay, we talked about types and things, so let's talk about types with the women as well. I think we can. There's this immense parallel here. Actually, you've got to ignore the sideshow. Jezebel and Herodias, they are not where it's at. Okay, total sideshow. The widow of Zarephath in Elijah, 1 Kings 17. And then the Shulamite woman, read ahead, do some homework. Elisha's story, 2 Kings 4, but it's not all his. There's these phenomenal symbols here of readiness. They're just so ready. There's this incredible reliance on God's provision, not a question. Just this deep reliance. It's like, just go get it done. And they act in this phenomenal environment of uncertainty. Powerfully just getting on with the job. There's no drama. They are the actual agents of the divine grace and provision, the everlasting oil, the woman's son brought back to resurrection life. They are transcending these cultural norms, undeserving widow who becomes the agent of the first resurrection. So let's not be pigeonholed by our stereotypes and the things that limit us. Let's just see this profound opportunity to not be a passive prophet, but to act with diligence and dependence, aware of the profound context in which we serve. So I'm done, and I just want to say thank you to Steve for just a tremendous series that's really impacted me. And I just pray that you would take that moment to do your performance check-in. Write down what impacted you. God is on the move. And the question is, are you a passive prophet watching it happen? Or are you going to get involved? I don't know what your calling is or your purpose, what your skill is, where you fit. But tomorrow morning, you're back in it. You don't have a choice. But are you going to be a passive prophet? Or are you going to engage, head between your knees, striking the water, getting on with the job? So I'm going to pray and hand over. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the power of your word to transform lives, to bring water into deserts. I pray you help us to not be passive prophets. We understand your word. We see the power and potential of you to transform lives. So we pray, give us the courageous ability to persevere, but also bring your empowerment, that you would empower us like you did the prophets Elijah and Elisha, empowering them to move on with the job. And we pray for that fruit of water, the transcendent eternal life that you brought through the widow's son, through the water at Jericho, where a new thing springs forth. From the rocks, from the wilderness, the water comes. See a new thing. Amen.